Did Donald Trump give aid or comfort to the enemies of the United States, and should he be removed from the ballot in 2024? That is the question in Colorado court this week, as a judge in Denver has been hearing testimony in a lawsuit that claims Trump incited an insurrection on January 6th and therefore violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. That states that anyone who swore an oath to uphold the Constitution as an elected official and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the U.S. or has given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof should not be able to hold federal or state office again. Among the witnesses who testified during the 5 days of hearings this week on Trump's side, Congressman Ken Buck, former Trump campaign spokesperson Katrina Pearson, and former Trump aide Kash Patel. For the plaintiffs, police officer Daniel Hodges, who was crushed in a door frame by rioters on January 6th, and Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell. Joining me now is Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat of California. He, of course, sits on the Judiciary Committee. Congressman Swalwell, thank you for being here. For people who have not seen any of this hearing, can you explain a little bit about why you were called to testify?
Well, as you mentioned, the case is essentially that because the president engaged in insurrection on January 6th, he's ineligible, to be on the ballot in Colorado. Now, unlike Donald Trump, I can follow a judge's order, so I'm not going to talk about the merits of the case. But the beauty here is that an independent judge is going, to weigh the evidence that was presented and make a decision. And I think the greater issue here is that over the past couple months, actually in 2023, we have seen this tapestry of accountability come together against Donald Trump for his prior actions. He's been a stranger to accountability his whole career. And as each thread is woven together, we've got a better shot at saving our democracy. And so, whatever happens in New York in the civil trial, or in Florida with the documents case, or Washington, D.C. with the January 6th case, or the Colorado case, or my own civil case that I have, the beauty here is he will not be judged under Trump justice, where he declares he's the judge, jury, and executioner. No, it'll be by a jury of his peers and an independent jurist. And Alex, I promise you this, at the end of all of this, when we come out of it, I don't think a single person is going to say, you know what, I think we were too hard on that guy. I think, if anything, it's going to be, we probably didn't hold him to account enough.
I wonder, as an independent observer, what you make of these movements to get Trump off the ballot because of potential violation of the 14th Amendment. I mean, how much stock do you put in them? Michael Ludig, who is a conservative judicial expert and former judge, said today with my colleague Nicole Wallace that he thinks that this isn't going to be a state court thing. This is going to go to the Supreme Court, and they are the ones who are going to decide whether Trump can be on the ballot or not.
I'll leave that to better experts. Look, I want to beat him, and we have beaten him since his best day was in 2016. And then he lost in 17 in some of the governor's races. He lost in 18 in the midterm elections. He lost the White House in 20 and the Senate, and we kept the House. In 22, we added to the Senate, and the red wave was avoided. We've beaten his candidates in special elections. He's a loser, and I'm happy to beat him again. And again, I was asked to testify in this case, and I just told, the story of what I experienced on January 6th. I do personally believe he engaged in insurrection, but it's up to the judge to decide what that means. But I think Democrats should be confident that we can beat this guy again. We can bury Trumpism. And when we do that, we give democracy the best chance of writing a new chapter for America and just coming out of the dark place that he's taken us for so long.
I do want to follow up on that, because the notion of beating Trumpism seems elusive at best, right? This is a person who, we talked about this earlier on the show, is now running ahead of Joe Biden, our sitting president, by half a point. Granted, that is a very, very small margin within the margin of error. But nonetheless, a person that faces 91 felony counts, a person who is implicated at best, if not much far, far worse, in the insurrection on the Capitol, still has a wealth of support. And do you think a trial is enough? Do you think taking him off the ballot is truly enough to rid the country of Trumpism?
It all goes to the bigger issue here, which is he brings chaos. Democrats and Biden are bringing competence. MAGA extremism versus mainstream, or, just, a record that President Biden brought of, growing the economy out of COVID, being strong in the world, and just bringing decency back. Look, at the end of the day, this is going to be a head-to-head contest, and we really need to inspire young people, Gen Z and millennials, bring them up to the levels they were at in 22 and 20, and we're going to win. But confidence begets confidence. Pessimism begets pessimism. And so we have to be confident that we're on the right side of this, and we will come out of it.
Congressman Eric Swalwell with the optimism for the end of the week. Thank you, sir.